Episode 1, The Hum begins. They said silence was the purest form of worship. But on the night Father Elias first heard the hum, silence became a thing to fear. The monastery of St. Martin stood like a fossil of faith, its stones damp with centuries of prayer, its corridors heavy with the scent of candle wax and incense. It was the kind of place where time didn't pass, it decayed. Elias had only been there 3 months, sent to serve as sacristan, the keeper of sacred vessels, the quiet guardian of quiet things. That night, a storm rolled across the Pyrenees, and the wind whistled through the old bell tower. Elias was arranging the chalices on the altar, careful not to wake the brothers sleeping in their cells. He could hear the rain trickling down the stained glass, the drip, drip, drip into the basin beside him. And then, something else. A sound too deliberate to be the wind. Too low to be thunder. It came from behind the wall of the sacristy, a deep, steady vibration that seemed to rise from the stone itself. Fluum. It wasn't loud, yet it filled the entire room, like the breath of something ancient exhaling through the cracks of the church. The crucifix above the altar trembled slightly, the candles flickered, and Elias froze. The sound wasn't random. It pulsed, steady, rhythmic, almost alive. He pressed his ear against the wall. The vibration crawled into his bones. And in that hum, he thought he heard something hidden, a voice beneath the tone, whispering his name. Elias. He staggered back, knocking over the chalice. The silver cup clanged against the stone floor, but even the noise seemed swallowed by the hum. The air thickened, like the church itself was holding its breath. He whispered a prayer, the Latin breaking between his teeth. But as he spoke the final amen, the sound faded, not abruptly, but as though retreating deeper underground, back into whatever pit it had come from. He waited for minutes, maybe hours. The silence returned, but it no longer felt holy. It felt watchful. Later that night, he went to Father Anselm, the abbot, a man with skin like parchment and eyes that seemed always half asleep. "Father," Elias began, "I heard something in the sacristy." The old man did not look up. "Many have," he said simply. "The monastery is old. It remembers." "What do you mean?" Elias pressed. But the abbot only closed his book and whispered, "Pray before you listen too closely. Some sounds aren't meant for the living." Elias returned to his quarters, though he didn't sleep. The hum echoed faintly in his skull, a memory that refused to fade. He could still feel the vibration through the floorboards, through his pulse, through his prayers. At dawn, he walked back into the sacristy. The air smelled different, sweet, metallic, like the aftermath of lightning. On the altar lay a single object he hadn't seen before, a small, tarnished silver key. It was warm. And when he picked it up, the hum returned. Not from the wall this time. From the key itself. Episode 2, The Silver Key. Father Elias didn't sleep that night. The key lay on his desk, gleaming faintly under candlelight. He had scrubbed it, polished it, even prayed over it, but no matter what he did, the faint vibration wouldn't stop. The hum was alive, low, and constant, like a heart beating in metal. It wasn't the sound that terrified him most. It was the rhythm. Every few seconds, the vibration pulsed 3 times, pause, then again. Like someone knocking softly from the other side of something ancient. By morning, the rain had stopped, and the monastery awoke with its usual stillness. The bells tolled for lauds. The monks filed through the corridors, chanting their Latin hymns, unaware that one of them carried something that should have never been found. Elias slipped the key into his robe pocket and approached Father Anselm. "Father," he said quietly, "I found this on the altar." The abbot turned, his thin lips parting slightly. His eyes lingered on the key. For the first time since Elias arrived, Anselm's hands trembled. "Where exactly did you find it?" "On the altar." After the hum. The old man's face drained of color. He took the key in both hands, whispered a prayer in Latin, then pressed it back into Elias's palm as though it burned him. "You will return it to where it came from." "But I don't know where that is," Elias said. Anselm's voice hardened. "Then do not search. Curiosity is a sin in places like this. There are locks in this monastery that God himself sealed." He turned and walked away, leaving Elias with the trembling key and 1,000 questions. That night, the hum returned, louder, closer. Elias followed it through the sacristy, past the altar, and toward the wall where he had first heard it. The vibration was strongest near the old stone arch where centuries of wax had dripped and hardened. He ran his hand along the surface and felt something wrong. A thin seam. He pressed harder. The stones shifted. Dust fell. Behind the wall, a shape took form, a door, ancient and narrow, its iron frame almost fused to the rock. And right in the center, beneath a faded carving of a cross, was a small keyhole. The hum grew desperate, pleading. Elias hesitated. He thought of the abbot's warning, of sin and punishment, of the eyes of God watching even through stone. But the sound beneath the door, it wasn't evil. It was calling. He raised the silver key. His hand shook, but the metal seemed to guide itself. The teeth slid perfectly into place. Click. The air froze. The candles behind him flickered out one by one. From somewhere deep beyond the wall came a sigh, long, relieved, almost human. The hum stopped. And in its absence came something far worse. A whisper. It came from the dark gap of the opening door, carried on cold air that smelled like earth and incense long extinguished. "Welcome back, Elias." His knees buckled. He dropped the key. It rolled across the stone and came to rest beside his boot, still warm, still alive, humming again, softly, like laughter beneath the ground. Episode 3, The Record of St. Martin. The door behind the sacristy refused to open again. Elias tried for hours, praying, pleading, pressing his ear to the cold stone, but it was as if the monastery itself had swallowed the lock. The key no longer vibrated. It lay in his drawer, silent, heavy, and guilt-shaped. For 3 nights, he dreamed of a voice calling from below. Always the same whisper, the same phrase. "Find the record. He wrote it for you." By dawn on the 4th day, Elias could bear it no longer. He slipped through the cloisters into the monastery's forbidden wing, the old archives, sealed to novices and sacristans alike. The air there was stale and dry, smelling of dust and decay. Rows upon rows of manuscripts sat behind iron gates. Centuries of faith, fear, and confession, preserved but forgotten. He lit a single candle and began to search. On the 3rd shelf, behind a stack of parish registries eaten by mold, he found it, a blackened book bound in human leather. The spine bore a single Latin inscription. Martin Confessions. Saint Martin, the monastery's founder. The one excommunicated for heresy, centuries ago. The man whose name was still whispered only during storms. Elias hesitated. His candle flickered, as if the air itself disapproved. He opened the cover. The first page was blank, except for one sentence carved, not written, into the parchment. The hum beneath the altar is the breath of God. His stomach turned. Each page that followed was worse: diagrams of sound frequencies, sketches of human skulls inscribed with prayer symbols, and verses written backward in Latin. Martin spoke of tuning the soul to divinity, of hearing the frequency of heaven. Elias felt cold sweat crawl down his neck. He turned to the final page and froze. There was a drawing of the sacristy. Every detail matched perfectly: the altar, the cross, the candlesticks. But behind it, Martin had drawn a hidden door. the same one Elias had found. At the bottom of the page, scrawled in red ink that looked too much like blood, were 3 words. "Do not unlock." A sound broke the silence, faint footsteps echoing in the corridor behind him. Elias snuffed the candle and crouched behind the shelves. Through the gaps in the books, he saw a flicker of light. A lantern. A shadow. Father Anselm. The abbot moved slowly through the archive, his face unreadable. He stopped in front of the very shelf Elias hid behind, and spoke softly, almost kindly. St. Martin's record should never be touched again. He reached forward and closed the book with a firm snap. The last man who read it lost his voice for good. He claimed the hum had entered his throat. Elias' pulse thundered. He wanted to run, but his limbs refused to move. When Anselm turned away, the candlelight illuminated the abbot's face, and Elias saw something he would never forget: tiny, rhythmic tremors beneath the old man's skin. As if he, too, was humming. When Anselm's footsteps faded, Elias took the book again and clutched it to his chest. He no longer cared about warnings. He needed to know what St. Martin had found beneath the altar and why the dead refused to stay silent. Because somewhere, beyond the locked stone and the sacred walls, the hum had begun again. Only this time, it was not from the earth. It was coming from inside the monastery walls. Episode 4, The Door That Shouldn't Exist. It was past midnight when Father Elias returned to the sacristy, St. Martin's record clutched tightly in his trembling hands. The storm outside had begun again, rain thrashing against the stained glass, thunder crawling across the roof like a living beast. The hum had returned too. Low, insistent, no longer hiding. It came from behind the altar. Elias knelt and pressed his ear to the cold marble floor. The vibration coursed through his skull, steady and rhythmic, echoing the strange symbols from Martin's journal. The air itself seemed to breathe, each inhale a whisper, each exhale a promise. The breath of God, Elias murmured. Or something that wants to be him. He took the silver key from his pocket. It was warm again, trembling faintly like a frightened heart. When he held it near the wall, the vibration intensified. Dust rained from between the stones, and the outline of the door began to shimmer faintly, as if acknowledging his presence. Elias whispered a prayer. But the words faltered halfway through. His faith, once sturdy, felt thin and stretched between devotion and dread. Still, he turned the key. Click. The same sigh, the same voice, soft and patient, "You came back." The wall split open along its seams with a groaning sound that seemed to echo through time itself. Cold air rushed out, air that hadn't moved in centuries. It smelled of rot, wax, and the faint sweetness of decay. Behind the wall was a staircase spiraling downward into blackness. The steps were carved stone, slick with moisture, edges worn smooth by hands that had climbed them long before him. He lifted his lantern and descended. Every step hummed faintly underfoot. The deeper he went, the more the walls seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat in stone. The flame in his lantern shivered as if afraid. After 20 steps, the stairway ended in a narrow corridor. Symbols, the same as in Martin's book, had been carved into the walls, but here they were incomplete, interrupted by what looked like claw marks. Some symbols were scratched out entirely, replaced by words in Latin that made Elias's stomach twist. Vox non Dei. The voice is not of God. At the corridor's end stood a wooden door, warped and blackened by time. On it hung a single rosary, its beads strung with teeth instead of pearls. Elias reached for the handle. His hand shook violently. When he touched the metal, the hum silenced for the first time in weeks. For a moment, he thought it was over. That the nightmare had ended. Then, from behind the door, something began to breathe. Slow. Wet. Labored. He stumbled backward, lantern swinging wildly. Its light caught something on the wall, a small fresco, almost hidden behind grime. It showed monks kneeling before the same door, hands raised not in prayer but in surrender. Beneath it, a sentence written in ancient ink. "The faithful who listen shall forget themselves." The handle turned on its own. The door creaked open. Elias raised the lantern, and the light fell upon something that should never have existed, a second altar, buried beneath the earth. Upon it lay a figure, perfectly preserved, its skin gray and smooth as marble. Its mouth was open, as if caught mid-scream, yet from that mouth came the faint, familiar sound. Fluum. Elias dropped the lantern. The flame exploded across the floor, casting trembling shadows against the walls. The eyes of the figure opened, milky white, ancient, alive. And then, the hum turned into words. 1,000 voices speaking at once, rising from the walls, from the corpse, from within his own head. Welcome to the choir. Episode 5, The Choir Without Mouths. The air beneath the church was alive. It breathed, it listened, it remembered. Father Elias stood frozen before the second altar, the one hidden under centuries of silence. The figure upon it was still, mouth open, white eyes unblinking. Yet from that lifeless form came a sound too structured to be random, a hum shaped like a melody. It wasn't a voice. It was a choir. At first, Elias thought his mind was fracturing. But as he listened closer, he heard it clearly, harmonies weaving together, notes rising and falling in patterns too deliberate for chaos. Each tone vibrated through his ribs, into his spine, until he felt as though his body itself had become part of the song. He stepped closer. The hum intensified, filling the chamber with a trembling resonance. Candles that had not been lit in centuries flickered to life, their flames moving in rhythm. Shadows began to sway against the stone, not from the wind, but as if the walls themselves were moving to the hymn. And then he saw them. Shapes forming between the shadows, figures in robes, heads bowed, mouths sealed by wax. Their faces were pale, cracked, but their chests rose and fell in unison with the sound. The choir of the dead. Elias's breath caught. "Who are you?" he whispered. The hum faltered just once, and a new tone entered the chorus, lower, human, agonized. "We sang for him," it murmured. "Until we forgot how to speak." Elias stumbled backward, the lantern trembling in his hand. "What are you singing now?" The answer came not in words, but in vibration. The frequency deepened, shaking the floor, shaking his heart. The walls began to weep moisture, red and slow, like blood finding its way through stone. The dead figures turned their faces toward him. Their eyes, hollow yet aware, fixed on his trembling form. The one nearest to the altar reached out a decayed hand and touched his sleeve. Elias tried to move, but his body wouldn't obey. A new voice emerged from within the hum, female, broken, familiar. "Elias." His stomach dropped. That voice, it couldn't be. He hadn't heard it since childhood. "Mother?" The walls groaned as though the monastery itself recognized the name. The humming collapsed into chaos, hundreds of voices now screaming the melody backward. Candles burst, wax melting into the shape of faces mid-prayer. Elias covered his ears, but the sound was inside his skull. The voice, his mother's, whispered again, now closer, echoing from the figure on the altar. "You opened the door. You joined the hymn." He fell to his knees. The hum surged again, deafening, divine, impossible. Every sealed mouth of the dead choir cracked open, wax falling like tears. From their throats came the same sound, now sharper, clearer. A song without lyrics. A prayer without mercy. Elias screamed, but his voice was swallowed. When he opened his mouth, no sound came out, only a faint vibration, resonating in perfect harmony with theirs. He clutched his throat. The truth hit him like cold steel. The choir hadn't been singing to him. It had been teaching him. And now, he was part of it. Episode 6, The Stigmata of Silence. When Father Elias awoke, his mouth was full of dust. The air smelled of ashes and iron. His throat ached, his ears rang, and the last echoes of the choir still pulsed faintly beneath his skin. He had fled the underground chamber before dawn. He thought he had fled, but the hum had followed him like a parasite, nesting inside his pulse. He tried to speak the morning prayer, but no sound came. Only vibration. The words formed in his mind but refused to pass his lips. His voice, his human voice, was gone. Replaced by a trembling note that wasn't entirely his. When he pressed his hand to his chest, he could feel it, thrumming like a second heart. By the time he reached the cloister, the monks were already whispering. They had found him unconscious beside the sacristy wall, blood trickling from his ears. Father Anselm said nothing. He merely looked at Elias's palms, then sighed a deep, defeated sound. Because both hands were bleeding. Thin, perfect cuts opened across the center of his palms, the blood rising and falling in slow rhythm, as if responding to some unseen pulse. The wounds did not hurt. They pulsed. They sang. "The marks of a saint," murmured one of the younger brothers. "No," said Anselm quietly. "The marks of a door he should not have opened." They bandaged his hands, locked him in his cell, and ordered him to pray. But prayer felt impossible now. The psalms in his head twisted themselves backward, each verse became a vibration. He pressed the rosary to his lips, but even the beads vibrated faintly, as if the wood remembered the hum too. That night, unable to sleep, he lifted his bandages. The wounds glowed faintly beneath the moonlight, the skin around them pulsing like a heartbeat. When he leaned closer, he realized the vibration was forming a pattern, a rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. The same rhythm as the key. He understood. The stigmata weren't wounds, they were messages. A language of blood. Driven by terror and faith in equal measure, Elias returned to the sacristy, barefoot, silent. The air was colder than usual. Candle flames bent toward him as he passed, as though drawn to the pulse in his hands. On the altar lay a missal, the same one he had left days ago. But now, between its pages, something was waiting, a torn fragment from St. Martin's book. It read, "When the hum enters flesh, the vessel becomes the tongue of heaven. But heaven is not what listens." Elias dropped the page, trembling. The hum grew stronger, climbing the walls, vibrating the glass of the stained windows. His reflection in the chalice blurred and multiplied, faces overlapping, his own, Martin's, others he did not know. And then, in the stillness, he heard it. A whisper inside his blood. "Speak for us." The words resonated through his bones. His lips moved against his will. A sound escaped, not human, not prayer, not scream. A single note, pure and ancient, filled the church and made the crucifix tremble. Somewhere deep below, beneath the stone and the silence, something answered. Episode 7, Confession of the Stone. The monastery had grown restless. Candles refused to stay lit. Paintings tilted on their own. The walls, once cold and obedient, had begun to murmur like living things. Father Elias felt it in every step, the hum beneath the floors, echoing in time with his wounds. The marks on his palms no longer bled, but they throbbed, as if whispering through his flesh. He no longer prayed out loud. Prayer had become dangerous. The last time he spoke the Lord's name, the crucifix above his bed began to hum back. But that night, something stronger than fear pulled him toward the sacristy once more, a rhythm inside him, ancient and commanding. The same rhythm that had opened the forbidden door. When he reached it, the air was thick with incense and rot. The silver key lay waiting on the altar, trembling softly, as if eager to be used again. Elias didn't remember touching it, only the cold metal pressing into his palm as though it had found him. The wall split apart with a groan like thunder, and the stairway yawned open below. The hum welcomed him back. He descended. The deeper he went, the more the air changed, no longer still, but heavy, as if the very stones were exhaling. The tunnel twisted downward until it opened into a vast chamber lit by dozens of candles melted into the rock itself. And there, carved into every surface, were names. Thousands of them. Names etched into the walls, the pillars, even the floor. Some old, some new, some crossed out violently. Elias moved closer, running his bandaged hand over the rough stone. Each name pulsed faintly beneath his touch, like veins under the skin of the earth. He knelt. The hum grew softer, almost tender. In the flickering light, he began to read. Brother Lucian. Father Anselm. Saint Martin. His breath caught. He moved faster, scanning the carvings, his eyes desperate, his hands trembling. Then he saw it. A name glowing faintly in red, freshly carved though no chisel had touched it. Elias Moreau. He staggered backward, horror flooding his chest. No, the word barely left his lips before the chamber itself answered. The hum turned violent, shaking the air. Dust rained from the ceiling. The candles flared white. And from the walls, the names began to whisper, overlapping voices, layered in agony and worship. Confess, they hissed. Confess, Elias. The floor rippled like water beneath him. From the cracks, a faint light emerged, golden, holy, wrong. The glow shaped itself into an image, a man kneeling, palms open, bleeding. His own posture reflected in stone. Then came a voice, not from around him, but from within him. You are one of us now. You have heard the true liturgy. Elias clutched his head. I am not. But before he could finish, his stigmata flared, bleeding through the cloth. The drops fell to the ground and hissed, and wherever they landed, new letters burned into the wall. More names. New names. The monks above. No! Elias screamed, but the walls continued carving, stone splitting open to inscribe every living soul in the monastery. The hum climbed to a pitch that was no longer music but pain. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. Heavy. Absolute. Elias stood shaking in the dark, surrounded by the glow of his own name. His breath came in ragged gasps. And in that stillness, one final whisper slithered from the wall behind him, soft, maternal, infinite. The stone remembers, my child. Even when you forget. Episode 8, The Visitor in the Mirror. Father Elias no longer trusted reflections. It began subtly, a glimmer at the edge of sight, a flicker behind the silver of a chalice or the glass of a windowpane. The first time he noticed, he dismissed it as exhaustion. But by the third night, he understood, the mirrors of St. Martin's monastery were no longer showing him. They were showing the ones beneath the stone. The hum had returned in whispers now, soft, rhythmic, almost intimate. It no longer vibrated through the walls but through his image. When Elias walked past the old mirror in the refectory, his reflection lagged behind, just for a breath. Its lips moved, forming words he could not hear. He froze. Speak, he whispered. If you are real, speak. And it did. The reflection's eyes rolled back, its jaw twisting open. A low note spilled from its mouth, not sound, but pressure, the same resonant hum that had lived in the stones.
Then, through the vibration, a voice emerged, faint, distant, yet unmistakably human.
Elias, the stone remembers. The same words he had heard in the chamber. He stumbled backward, heart-hammering.
The mirror fogged from within, a thin layer of condensation forming letters in slow motion, confess. He ran.
Through the corridor, past the chapel, into his cell, slamming the door behind him. He tore the crucifix from the wall and pressed it against his chest until the edges dug into his skin. But even here, in solitude, he felt the reflection watching. Every surface shimmered faintly, the brass handle, the window, the cup of holy water beside his bed. Each one held a fragment of his face, distorted, multiplied, alive. He whispered a prayer for strength. But when he looked down, the water in the cup rippled. The reflection staring back wasn't praying.
It was smiling. Elias's throat tightened.
He grabbed the cup and hurled it against the wall. Water splattered, and for a moment, he swore he saw dozens of hands pressing out from inside the mirror shards before they vanished into the stone.
The hum deepened.
He ran to the chapel, desperate to find Father Anselm, but the abbot was already waiting, standing before the altar, his reflection staring from the tall confessional mirror beside him.
Anselm's face looked weary, aged beyond reason.
"You've seen them," the abbot said softly.
"They found you."
"Who?"
Elias gasped. "The ones in the walls?"
"No," Anselm murmured.
"The ones behind the walls."
He gestured to the mirror.
"They are not trapped, Elias. We are."
Before Elias could speak, the reflection of Anselm moved, though the man himself remained still. The mirrored version smiled with cold reverence, reached forward, and placed its hand against the glass.
The hum rose, filling the chapel.
Elias watched, horrified, as the abbot's reflection pressed harder until its hand passed through the mirror, gripping the real Anselm by the wrist. The old man screamed. The sound fractured into static. The mirror rippled like water, swallowing his arm, his shoulder, his chest, and then he was gone. Only his reflection remained. It turned toward Elias, its eyes blank, its voice layered with hundreds of tones.
"Your confession has been heard."
The hum became unbearable. Every mirror in the chapel shattered at once, shards flying like glass rain.
Elias shielded his face, blood streaking his robe. When the silence returned, he looked up.
On the altar, where Anselm had stood moments before, there was nothing left but his rosary, and in every shard of glass on the floor, Elias saw himself reflected.
Not once, but many times. Each reflection moved differently. And each one was smiling.
Episode 9, The Locked Confessional. The monastery was too quiet now. The kind of silence that didn't feel holy, but expectant, like the air itself was waiting for someone to speak.
Father Elias hadn't slept since the mirror shattered.
The cuts on his arms still burned, and every reflection he passed seemed to blink a fraction too late. But that night, as he walked through the nave, a different sound broke the suffocating stillness.
Kriak.
It came from the confessional booth.
The one that had been sealed for more than a century. The monks avoided it.
They said it had been locked since 1812, when the last priest to use it, Father Lucian, had vanished during Massachusetts. The door had been nailed shut, sealed with holy wax, and declared cursed. But now, the wax was melted. The nails lay scattered on the floor.
And the door hung open. A faint light flickered from within. Elias approached, his hands trembling.
He pushed the door slowly, the hinges crying out after years of silence. Inside, the booth was dark except for a single candle, burning with an unnatural blue flame. The scent of decay clung to the air. He knelt. "Forgive me, Father," he whispered, his voice shaking.
"For I." A sound interrupted him. Not a voice. A breath. He froze. The screen that separated the two chambers quivered, dust falling from its edges. Through the lattice, Elias saw the faint outline of a figure seated in the priest's chair, a black silhouette, head bowed, motionless. "Father?" The figure didn't move. Elias leaned closer. His heart hammered so hard it almost drowned out the hum that had begun to seep back into the air. And then he saw it. The figure wasn't sitting, it was slumped. A skeleton draped in rotting vestments, hands still clutching a rosary of blackened bone. The skull tilted forward as though listening. Elias gasped, stumbling back. But before he could move further, the confessional door slammed shut behind him. The blue flame flickered violently, and the air turned thick, suffocating. From the other side of the screen came a whispered dry, cracking, layered with centuries of dust. "Confess." Elias's voice broke. "Who are you?" The skeleton's jaw creaked open. From its hollow mouth came not words, but sound, the same deep hum that had haunted the monastery. Only this time, it carried a rhythm, a confession. In the vibration, Elias heard meaning. A man's voice, buried in tones. "I heard the voice beneath the altar. I sang its hymn. I am its vessel still." The skeleton's rosary began to glow, beads rattling against bone. The booth trembled as the hum deepened, shaking the very wood. Elias covered his ears, but the sound was inside him now, vibrating through his ribs, through the blood that pulsed in his stigmata. The corpse's head turned, slowly, impossibly, until its eyeless sockets faced him through the screen. Its teeth clicked once. Then, in a voice that was almost human, it whispered, "You opened the door I died to close." The candle extinguished. Total darkness. Elias screamed, pushing the door open, stumbling into the chapel's cold light. His breath came in ragged bursts. Behind him, the confessional was silent again. But as he turned to flee, he saw something glinting on the pew beside him, an object wrapped in dust. A rosary. The same one from the skeleton's hands. Only now, the beads were warm. And from them came the faintest sound. Flume. Not the hymn of the dead this time, but the heartbeat of something waking. Episode 10, The Blood That Sang. Morning light cut through the stained glass windows like blades of quiet fire. It painted the pews in colors that should have felt divine: crimson, gold, sapphire, but to Father Elias, they looked more like wounds. The monastery felt awake. Every step echoed too loudly, every whisper carried too far. Even the silence had a pulse. Today was Sunday Mass, the first since the confessional opened. The monks gathered in uneasy rows, their voices trembling through the kyrie. Father Elias stood at the altar, robe trembling with his breath, palms hidden beneath his sleeves. The stigmata burned faintly, pulsing with each note of the chant. He began the liturgy as always. But when he lifted the chalice, the hum returned, low, mournful, vibrating from the floor up through the altar. At first, no one noticed. Then the wine inside the chalice began to ripple. Elias froze. The monks fell silent. The hum grew deeper, resonant, shaping itself into a melody, slow, solemn, beautiful. The kind of sound that would have belonged to angels, if it hadn't made the walls tremble. And then, the blood came. From the cracks of the marble altar, a dark liquid began to seep upward, thick and glistening. It ran down the sides like tears, pooling at Elias's feet. The smell was unmistakable: iron, salt, life. The monks gasped. One fell to his knees, muttering prayers through sobs. Another backed away, clutching his crucifix so tightly it snapped. But Elias couldn't move. Because the blood wasn't random. It was singing.
The hum had transformed into a chorus, each note carried by the rhythm of the dripping blood. The puddle on the floor vibrated in time with his heartbeat. The wounds on his palms opened again, not bleeding, but pouring sound, a deep, harmonic tone that mingled with the altar's melody. And through it all, he heard the same voice he'd heard in his dreams.
Soft. Maternal. Divine. You are the vessel, Elias.
The hymn of flesh and stone.
The others screamed. Some fled.
But one monk, Brother Raphael, stepped forward, tears streaming down his face.
"Father, it's a miracle," he cried. "It's the blood of Christ."
Elias looked at him and for an instant, saw the monk's reflection shimmer on the wet marble.
The reflection smiled back, lips moving before Raphael's did. "Not Christ," it whispered. The hum spiked.
The blood on the floor began to rise, thin tendrils of crimson lifting into the air, twisting like ribbons, vibrating with impossible frequency.
The sound pressed into Elias's skull, so loud it became silence. Then everything stopped. The ribbons collapsed. The hum ceased.
And the monastery plunged into stillness again, except for the faint drip of blood still sliding from the altar's edge. Elias stared at his hands. The wounds were gone. He felt lightheaded, empty, unanchored. When he turned to look at the chalice, it was full once more, but not with wine. It overflowed with blood. And carved into the base of the cup, where no words had been before, were 3 fresh letters, glistening like they'd just been written.
AMD. He didn't know what they meant. But as he whispered them, the chalice hummed back. Episode 11, The Monk Who Never Left.
The monastery had begun to smell of rust and myrrh, a scent Elias could no longer separate from blood and prayer. Since the Mass, the monks refused to speak of what happened. The altar was scrubbed clean, the floor polished until it gleamed like wet glass. Yet every night, as the candles burned low, Elias heard the same thing, footsteps beneath the chapel.
Slow. Measured. Unhurried. Someone was walking down there. He tried to dismiss it as imagination, but the records haunted him.
St. Martin's book had mentioned one name again and again, Brother Lucian, the first monk to hear the frequency of grace. The man who vanished into the depths centuries ago. But what if he hadn't vanished? What if he'd simply kept listening? Elias couldn't resist. He waited until midnight, when the storm outside drowned the sounds of his steps. With a lantern in one hand and the silver key in the other, he descended once more through the hidden door. The air below was colder this time, dense enough to taste. The hum was faint, but present, like a breath waiting to be drawn. The walls sweated moisture that smelled of salt and incense. Deeper still, the tunnel opened into a small chamber Elias hadn't seen before. Candles burned there, fresh candles, their flames steady, untouched by time. And sitting in front of them, back turned to him, was a man in a tattered robe. His head was bowed, his spine bent, his hands folded in eternal prayer. Elias froze. "Brother?" The man didn't answer. He stepped closer. "Brother Lucian?" At the sound of his name, the figure's head turned, slowly, creaking like old wood. His face was dry and ashen, lips split from centuries of silence, eyes sunk deep into shadow. Yet he was alive. Barely. Lucian smiled. His teeth were black. "You opened it," he rasped. "You heard what we could not silence." Elias's voice trembled. "You've been here all this time?" Lucian chuckled softly, the sound like gravel in a grave. "Time? There's no time here. Only rhythm. Only the hum." He raised his hand, bones showing beneath translucent skin, and pointed toward the far wall.
Elias lifted the lantern and gasped. There were hundreds of parchments pinned to the stone, written in blood. Each one a name. Each one a confession. I wrote them, Lucian whispered. Every soul that heard the hum, every brother who sang its prayer. I keep the record. Elias approached one of the sheets. The blood letters still glistened. The newest entry read, Elias Moreau. Vessel forming. His stomach twisted. Why my name? Lucian's grin widened. Because it's your turn to finish the hymn. The hum returned, deep and furious, shaking the lantern's flame. The walls pulsed with crimson light. Lucian began to sway, whispering in a voice that wasn't his own, 1,000 tones layered in a single mouth. The choir needs its conductor. Elias stumbled back, clutching his ears. But the sound poured into him, through him. Images flooded his mind, the bleeding altar, the mirrors, the bones that sang. The hum was no longer outside, it was inside, alive and hungry. When he opened his eyes, Lucian was gone. Only his robe remained, folded neatly on the ground, and beneath it a quill made of bone, dripping fresh red ink. Elias stared at it, trembling. His hands moved on their own, guided by something unseen. He took the quill, dipped it into nothing, and began to write upon the wall beside his name. The stone accepted the letters like flesh. The song is not over. Episode 12, The Choir Rehearsal. The monastery was preparing for Easter. Candles lined the aisles, golden light flickering against stone walls that still seemed to breathe. The choir gathered in the nave, voices low and uncertain, practicing hymns that had not been sung for generations. Father Elias watched from the shadows near the sacristy. He had not slept in days. His hands still trembled from what he'd seen beneath the monastery, the ancient writings. The man who was no longer alive yet had spoken his name. But worst of all was the hum that would not leave him. It lived inside him now, beating faintly under his ribs like an extra heart. The choir began. Their voices rose, fragile but pure, filling the chapel. For a moment, Elias felt something close to peace. Then, halfway through the hymn, the sound changed. It was subtle at first, a note too low, a breath too long. The harmony bent, just slightly, like glass beginning to warp under heat. Elias looked up. The air around the singers shimmered. Their mouths moved in unison, but the sound that came out wasn't theirs. The hum had joined the song. The vibration deepened, rippling through the air, turning the hymn into something both beautiful and unbearable. The candles began to tremble. The crucifix above the altar swayed on its chain. And one by one, the monks' eyes rolled back, their voices growing stronger, louder, as if something else was singing through them. Elias ran forward. "Stop," he shouted. But his voice was lost beneath the resonance. The choir's conductor, Brother Raphael, stood frozen, his arms still raised. His lips moved without sound, yet the room shook with power. The hum now had words, layered beneath the melody, in a language Elias didn't recognize. It sounded ancient, wet, alive. Then came the break. The stained glass window behind the altar shattered inward, spraying color and dust. The air surged with energy. Elias fell to his knees, hands pressed to his ears. He could feel the hum clawing through his mind, threading through his veins. Every monk in the choir began to bleed from their mouths, thin streams of crimson that shimmered in the candlelight. Still, they sang. Their voices blended into one impossible tone, a sound that felt like eternity compressed into a single moment. Elias could see their throats vibrating unnaturally fast, chords straining beyond what flesh could bear. One monk collapsed mid-verse, his body still shaking to the rhythm. And then, as suddenly as it began, the music stopped. The monks dropped to the floor, gasping, weeping.
The silence that followed was unbearable, heavy, absolute, a silence that hummed beneath the skin.
Elias rose slowly.
Brother Raphael lay motionless at the altar, his eyes open and empty. Blood trickled from his ears. His hand still clutched the conductor's baton. But when Elias leaned closer, he saw that Raphael's lips were still moving. Whispering. He bent down to listen. The words were barely audible, but he caught them, 5 Latin syllables that chilled his soul.
Cantus resurrectio divinus. The song of divine resurrection.
Elias backed away, horror clawing at his throat. The blood on the altar began to quiver again, vibrating in rhythm with the whispered phrase.
The song wasn't over. It was just beginning. Episode 13, The Possession of Father Anselm.
The monastery bells tolled at midnight, though no one had touched them. Their sound was wrong, warped, echoing in strange intervals, as if the air itself resisted the notes.
The monks woke one by one, murmuring prayers, clutching their rosaries.
But Elias knew it wasn't the bells that had awakened them.
It was him. Father Anselm had returned.
3 days had passed since he was swallowed by the mirror. The brothers had mourned him, buried his robes in the garden, and prayed for his soul. Yet now he stood at the chapel doors, silent and dry-eyed, his reflection glimmering faintly even in the absence of glass. "Father," whispered Brother Raphael, still pale from the rehearsal.
"You've come back."
Anselm smiled, a slow, deliberate stretch of lips that didn't reach his eyes.
His skin looked thinner, almost translucent, veins pulsing faintly beneath it like moving ink.
When he spoke, the voice that came was not entirely his. "The Lord never leaves his house," he said. But beneath the words, there was another voice, deep, layered, echoing.
Elias stepped forward.
"Where did you go?" Anselm's gaze found him, and for a moment, Elias felt the weight of centuries pressing into his skull. His stigmata flared under the bandages.
The air between them vibrated.
"I was shown," Anselm said softly. "The silence beneath creation. The hymn that holds the world together."
Elias's throat tightened.
"You heard the hum."
Anselm tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. "I became it."
Then he raised his hands.
The chapel trembled.
Every candle flame bent toward him, stretching like threads of light drawn to his breath.
The choir woke me. Their song reached through the mirror.
They sang my name backward. The monks began to whisper frantic prayers, crossing themselves, but their words twisted in their mouths, warping into the same unnatural melody from the rehearsal. The hum filled the room again, stronger, richer, alive.
Anselm turned toward the altar.
The vessel bleeds.
The key trembles. The time has come. Elias's heart pounded. "Stop. You don't understand what you're summoning." Anselm laughed, a broken, melodic laugh that split into multiple tones.
His shadow on the wall began to move independently, writhing upward until it stood behind him, larger, darker, stretching its arms like wings. "I am not summoning," Anselm said.
"I am opening."
The crucifix above the altar shuddered violently, the nails screeching. One by one, the statues along the chapel cracked, faces splitting, marble mouths opening as though gasping for air. From within them, faint light spilled, pulsing in rhythm with the hum.
The monks screamed and fled, but Elias stood rooted, watching as Anselm approached him.
The abbot's eyes glowed faintly, not with fire, but with reflected light, like something shining from behind his skull. He reached out, placing a trembling hand on Elias's chest. The hum within Elias resonated with the hum in Anselm.
Their bodies vibrated in sync, 2 notes aligning. "Do you hear it now, Elias?" Anselm whispered. "The song was never meant to be sung. It was meant to become us."
The abbot's voice deepened into a tone that shook the rafters.
The crucifix snapped free from its chain, crashing to the floor. The walls bled candle wax that hissed like whispers. Elias fell to his knees, choking on air that seemed too thick to breathe.
The hum swelled until it became pain.
Anselm leaned close, his face inches away.
The choir of flesh is tuning itself. Soon, there will be no silence left in the world. And then, his body convulsed.
The light in his eyes flared.
His mouth opened wider than humanly possible, the sound pouring out like wind through a cathedral pipe, one endless note that shattered glass and bone alike. When it stopped, Anselm collapsed, smoke rising from his robes. Elias crawled to him, heart pounding. The abbot's chest no longer moved. But when Elias looked into his open mouth, he saw something glimmering deep inside, a silver key, humming softly. Episode 14, The Tuning Fork of God. The monastery was dying. After Father Anselm's final scream, the brothers fled into the mountains. Some vanished in the mist, others fell silent mid-prayer, their voices swallowed by the same invisible current that had taken the abbot. By dawn, only Father Elias remained.
He did not run. He could not.
The hum inside him had become too strong to escape. It whispered through his veins, guiding him with gentle, patient persistence down the same stairway, through the same hidden door, into the dark beneath the altar. He carried with him the silver key he had taken from Anselm's mouth. It pulsed faintly, warm as living flesh. The path below had changed. The tunnels no longer felt carved by men. They pulsed, curved, breathed. The walls shimmered faintly, wet as muscle, etched with new sigils that glowed with red light.
Elias felt them vibrate through his fingertips like veins responding to his heartbeat.
At the end of the corridor, he found a vast chamber he had never seen before, circular, cathedral-like, and utterly still.
In the center stood something impossible.
A structure carved entirely from obsidian and bone, two massive pillars joined at the top by a crossbeam of polished stone, humming with low, living energy. It resembled a tuning fork, but scaled for a god.
Elias fell to his knees, breath stolen from his chest.
The vibrations filled the chamber like breath fills lungs. Each pulse of sound made the candles flicker, the floor tremble, and his heart align with the rhythm. The air shimmered around the monolith, bending light itself into strange shapes. He understood, at last, what Saint Martin had written. The hum was not a sound. It was a frequency of creation. A note so pure it could command flesh, bend time, resurrect the dead, or erase them. As he approached, the key in his hand began to resonate, matching the tone perfectly. His blood answered the call, his wounds opening slightly, bleeding in patterns that vibrated like strings plucked by invisible fingers. On the base of the fork, an inscription waited beneath centuries of dust. Ad vocem Dei, caro respondebit. At the voice of God, the flesh shall answer. Elias pressed the key into the hollow between the pillars. It fit perfectly. The fork sang. The sound was beyond hearing, it was pressure, light, ecstasy, terror. The entire chamber vibrated as if it were alive, every candle flaring to white. The bones beneath the stone trembled, and for a heartbeat, Elias felt everything. He saw the monks who had fled, standing in the forest, their eyes empty but their bodies humming softly in rhythm. He saw the abbot's reflection, still trapped in the mirror, mouthing the same note. He saw the statues bleeding from their marble mouths. He saw the earth itself vibrating, the mountains, the sea, even the stars above, each trembling faintly to the same unholy frequency. And then, amid the chorus of creation, a voice spoke. It came from within the fork, but also from within Elias. Calm, immense, tender. Every prayer you ever whispered was not heard. It was measured. Every word you thought holy was part of my equation. And now, my song is complete.
Elias's knees buckled. "Who are you?" he gasped. The voice almost smiled. "I am the silence between your heartbeats. The echo that became faith. You called me God, but I am only his remainder." The chamber exploded in light. Elias screamed as the fork's vibration climbed higher, carving fire through his bones. His body lifted from the ground, blood spiraling upward like threads of red glass. Then, suddenly, silence. He collapsed, gasping, smoke rising from his skin. The key lay on the floor beside him, split in two. The fork stood still, humming faintly, like a beast asleep. And on the wall before him, freshly carved into stone, glowed a new inscription. "He has learned to tune the divine." Elias stared, trembling, realization dawning like blasphemy. He hadn't silenced the hum. He had become part of its song. Episode 15, The Whisper Beneath the Altar. The silence after the tuning fork should have been holy. It was not. Father Elias stood trembling before the black monolith, his breath shallow, blood still humming faintly beneath his skin. The silver key lay shattered at his feet, yet the sound it once carried still pulsed in the air, faint, like a heartbeat beneath stone. He stumbled back toward the staircase. The candlelight dimmed as though retreating from him. For the first time in weeks, there was no sound in the monastery. No humming. No prayers. Only the echo of his own heartbeat until he reached the sacristy. There, beneath the altar, something was breathing. The marble slab trembled almost imperceptibly, a thin crack running across its surface like a pulse beneath skin. Elias fell to his knees, pressing his ear against the cold stone. What he heard was not merely vibration, it was language. Whispers, layered and endless, voices speaking over each other in tones that defied reason. He could hear Latin, Hebrew, and something older, a dialect that predated creation. The voices did not pray. They pleaded. "Elias," one whispered, close enough to feel. He froze. "Who are you?" The voice came again, softer this time, like wind through a tomb. The one they silenced. The truth buried beneath their faith. Elias clutched the crucifix around his neck. "If you are not of God." A low laugh echoed beneath the stone. "God? Tell me, child, when was the last time he answered you?" The words stabbed through him. His prayers unanswered for years, his doubts growing like weeds behind his sermons. The voice knew. "You call your silence divine," it whispered. But silence is only the sound of what he abandoned. The altar cracked wider, a soft breath of dust rising. The hum returned, gentle, coaxing, familiar. The same tone that had haunted him since that first night. It vibrated through the crucifix in his hand until it burned his palm. He dropped it, gasping. From within the altar came a light, faint and red, pulsing like the heart of something alive. "Let me speak," the voice pleaded. "Let me rise again." Elias shook his head, tears streaking his face. "You're not him." "No," the voice agreed, its tone almost tender. "I am what he left behind. The echo that remembered what he forgot." The vibration deepened, shaking the chalices on the shelves. The floor split slightly beneath the altar, revealing a narrow gap that pulsed with light and sound, a mouth waiting to breathe. Elias crawled closer, unable to stop himself. The hum synchronized with his pulse, his blood sang in his ears. He could feel the rhythm aligning, his heartbeat merging with the altar's. "You are my instrument," the voice said. "You have carried my frequency, spread my song. Through your hands, I will speak again." Elias screamed, pressing his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside him now, vibrating through every cell. The stigmata on his palms opened once more, bleeding symbols that glowed in unison with the altar's pulse. He tried to pray,
But the words came out wrong, backward, inverted, reshaped into a tongue not meant for men. The air grew heavy with it, sacred and blasphemous at once.
The altar split open.
Light poured through the crack, not heavenly, but red and endless. From within came the faint outline of a figure, its form made of trembling sound, its shape always changing, impossible to focus on.
Elias crawled backward, trembling. "What are you?"
The voice smiled through every whisper.
"I am the forgotten hymn, Elias. The first sound that ever broke the void.
You called me God once, before you learned to stop listening." The hum swelled, shaking the church to its foundation. Statues toppled, candles burst. And as Elias fell to the floor, one final whisper touched his ear, softer than breath, crueler than mercy.
"Now, child, let me sing through you."
Episode 16, The Lost Mass. The morning after the altar split, the monastery stood in perfect stillness, a ruin suspended in prayer. Dust hung in the air like frozen incense. Every candle had melted into the shape of hands. Father Elias wandered the corridors, lost between faith and madness. He no longer knew if he was still serving God or something that merely wore his voice. The whisper beneath the altar had stopped speaking, but its rhythm still lived inside him, pulsing behind his heartbeat. He was about to leave the sacristy when he noticed something that shouldn't have been there, a gramophone. It sat on a small wooden table, its horn tarnished with age, its brass mouth bent as if it had been crushed and rebuilt.
A cracked label clung to its side, written in Latin. Missa Perdita, April 3, 1749.
Elias's blood turned cold. That was the year the monastery first fell silent. His hands shook as he turned the crank. The record began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, until the needle dropped with a hiss of static. At first, there was nothing, only the faint crackle of time. Then came a sound that should never have existed. The voices of monks.
Praying. But backward. Their chants spilled from the horn in reverse, distorted and wet, as though sung from underwater.
Every syllable unmade itself, folding language back into raw sound.
Elias recognized the cadence of the Mass, but twisted, inverted, a liturgy undone.
He listened, horrified, as the prayer rose in tempo, transforming into that same familiar hum, the one that had haunted him for weeks. Yet this was purer, sharper, a tone that drilled straight into the skull. Then a man's voice emerged, breaking through the reversed chorus.
"This is Father Lucian," it said, trembling, desperate.
"If anyone hears this recording, do not repeat these words.
The Mass has turned upon itself. The altar breathes.
The host bleeds.
We thought we were summoning God. We were wrong."
A low groan echoed in the background, the sound of something enormous shifting stone.
Lucian's breathing grew frantic. "It's beneath us now.
It learned our prayers.
It sings them back. And every time we listen, it remembers more." The record began to distort, the audio warping as if the voice were being pulled away from the microphone.
Then came the scream, not human, but something vast, metallic, vibrating through the bones. The hum burst through the speakers, shaking the table, shaking the air. Elias covered his ears, but the sound was already inside him, resonating in perfect harmony with the marks on his hands. The stigmata burned bright crimson.
Then the recording spoke back. In his own voice.
"Elias," it whispered through static, "the Mass was never lost.
You are completing it."
The gramophone snapped off. The needle spun aimlessly.
The silence that followed was suffocating.
Elias staggered back, eyes wide, heart hammering in panic. He looked down at the record. It was no longer spinning, but the grooves were moving, pulsing like veins, as if the vinyl itself were alive. From the horn came one last faint whisper, barely audible. "The next verse begins in blood."
Elias turned toward the altar. It was glowing again, slow, rhythmic, alive. And deep below, the hum began to rehearse. Episode 17, The Resurrection Chamber. The hum was calling again. It came not from the altar now, nor from the shattered mirrors or the gramophone that still whispered in silence. It came from below. From the deep, ancient marrow of the monastery itself, the place no map dared name. Father Elias could no longer resist it. He wasn't sure he wanted to. His blood vibrated with each note, his pulse syncing perfectly with the rhythm that had once terrified him. Now, it felt like destiny. He took a lantern and followed the sound through the ruined sacristy. The air was thick, metallic, heavy with the scent of rain and rot. The hidden door behind the altar stood open, as if waiting. The stairway below pulsed faintly with red light. He descended. Each step sank deeper into warmth, as though he were walking through the veins of the earth itself. The hum grew louder, stronger, more human. Soon he could make out voices within it, 1,000 overlapping tones, rising and falling in unbearable harmony. Then he saw it. A vast cavern, shaped like the inside of a cathedral, opened before him. Its ceiling vanished into darkness, but the walls glowed faintly, not from torchlight, but from the reflection of bone. Rows upon rows of skulls were embedded into the stone, forming intricate patterns and architecture of the dead. Every skull had its mouth open, and from each one came the faint vibration of sound. It was a choir. A choir made of the dead. Elias staggered forward, the lantern shaking in his hand. The floor beneath him was made not of stone but of femurs, vertebrae, and rib cages fitted perfectly together, humming in unison. The air was alive with resonance, as though the bones themselves were singing. He fell to his knees. My God! But even as he spoke, he realized it wasn't a prayer. The hum had shaped his words before he could. At the center of the chamber stood an altar made entirely of skulls, their crowns fused together to form a surface polished smooth by centuries of worship. On it lay a single object, a chalice carved from a human spine, filled with blood that shimmered like liquid light. Elias approached slowly. The hum softened, became melodic, almost gentle, as if the room itself was holding its breath for him. He reached out. The chalice vibrated beneath his fingers. Inside, the blood rippled, forming words across its surface in tiny waves. Sing, Elias. He tried to pull back, but his throat had already begun to vibrate. The tone rose unbidden from deep within him, a low note that matched the pitch of the bones. The skulls responded instantly, their mouths glowing faintly as the hum aligned, harmony born of flesh and dust. Then the bones began to move. Ribs twisted, vertebrae shuddered, skulls turned toward him, their empty sockets glowing with light. The chamber's hum grew deafening, transforming into a single immense voice that filled his head and heart. We are the choir of the first creation, it thundered, the sound that preceded light. Elias's body convulsed, his palms bleeding anew. Blood streamed down his arms, tracing patterns on the floor that began to glow. The bones beneath him shifted, rearranging themselves into shapes he could not comprehend, sigils of divine geometry. Through you, the voice continued, we rise again. The hymn of flesh resumes. He screamed, but his scream became melody. His ribs ached as if strings were being plucked inside his chest. The lantern shattered, plunging the chamber into pulsing red light. The skulls began to chant his name. Not as a man, but as an instrument. Elias. 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 He collapsed beside the altar, trembling, vision blurring. The blood within the chalice rose upward in a single column, coiling through the air like smoke, and from it, a faint, human shape began to form. The voice whispered, soft as ash. The resurrection begins with a name. Elias reached toward the figure, tears streaming down his face. "Whose name?" The whisper answered from everywhere and nowhere. "Yours." Episode 18, The Song of the Dead. The thing rising from the chalice was not a spirit. It was memory made flesh. The blood that floated above the altar of skulls shaped itself into something almost human, a form without edges, shifting, trembling, made of voices. The faces of monks flickered within it like reflections in red water, many Elias recognized, and others who could not possibly still exist. Every mouth within that shape was moving. Singing. Elias fell to his knees, shaking. The air was thick with sound, too layered, too perfect, too alive. The vibrations pressed against his chest until his ribs ached, until he could feel the pitch traveling through his bones. The walls around him began to pulse. The skulls sang with the same unholy melody, their hollow mouths opening wider, stretching into frozen screams. The hum had evolved into music now, a chorus of agony and worship. And beneath it all, one voice spoke clearly. Soft. Intimate. His own. Elias Moreau, vessel of the unfinished hymn, the choir welcomes you. He stared at the floating mass of blood and light. Who are you? He gasped. The voices overlapped in reply, hundreds speaking as one, weaving themselves into harmony. We are what remains when prayer forgets its meaning. We are the echo of belief. The figure descended, its form splitting into streams of red that wound around his body like ribbons. Wherever it touched, his skin burned, not with fire, but revelation. He could hear their deaths, their final breaths, their confessions drowned in the hum. Monks, priests, believers, sinners, every soul that had ever prayed inside St. Martin's monastery was singing through him now. He tried to scream, but sound betrayed him. His cry merged with the melody, rising in pitch, until his voice was indistinguishable from theirs. The chamber shook violently. Cracks spread through the bone walls. The skulls began to crumble, but even in decay they kept singing. The song no longer belonged to the dead alone, it belonged to everything. Through the cracks above, he could see faint light breaking through the ceiling. The monastery itself was vibrating, every brick trembling in perfect rhythm. The world was listening. Elias's eyes rolled back as visions poured into his mind, oceans trembling in harmony, forests humming in low unison, clouds vibrating like the skin of drums. The hum was spreading, not as a curse, but as a contagion of faith. The figure of blood leaned close. Faces rippled across its surface, Anselm, Lucian, Martin, all smiling the same hollow smile. Now you understand, the voices whispered. Resurrection is not flesh returning to life. It is sound reclaiming silence. Elias felt his body lifting off the ground, drawn into the center of the altar's glow. His veins pulsed like strings on a divine instrument. Blood flowed upward from his wounds, joining the swirling red mass. Sing, it said. And he did. The first note that left his throat wasn't human. It was pure, impossible, the sound of creation and destruction colliding. The entire chamber responded, skulls collapsing, bones snapping in rhythm, dust rising like smoke from incense. The hum reached a frequency beyond hearing. The very air fractured. Then, nothing. Silence. Elias collapsed beside the altar, every breath a prayer he couldn't finish. The blood around him had vanished, absorbed into the stone. The walls no longer glowed, but something else filled the room, a low pulse, faint, alive. From somewhere deep within the earth came the sound of new voices joining the song. Men. Women. Children. The living. The dead were no longer singing alone. Episode 19, The Last Confession. When Father Elias awoke, the world was still singing. It wasn't a sound one could escape, it came from within. From blood, from bone, from the invisible breath between heartbeats.
The monastery above him was gone, reduced to ash and echoes, yet the melody persisted, reverberating across the land like a slow, sacred contagion. He stood alone in the resurrection chamber, surrounded by ruin. The altar of skulls had melted into the earth, and where the chalice once stood, there was only a faint, pulsing light, a dying heartbeat of something ancient. He felt hollow, emptied of voice, but filled with knowing. Every memory that wasn't his lived inside him now. Every monk, every prayer, every confession whispered to the hum, they were all there, speaking softly in the corners of his mind. Then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that waits before judgment. A figure began to take shape in the red dust before him, tall, robed in shifting darkness, its face obscured by light too bright to bear. Its outline shimmered like a candle flame, bending reality around it. Elias fell to his knees. "Is it you?" he whispered. "Are you the one I've served all my life?" The figure did not answer at first. When it finally spoke, its voice carried the weight of every confession ever uttered, gentle, heavy, terribly kind. "You served what you could not understand." Elias trembled. "Then, who have I served?" "Faith itself," the voice replied. "Faith that feeds what listens in the dark. Every prayer you spoke, every silence you offered, I drank it all." Elias's tears burned as they fell. "Then you're not God." The light shifted. He could feel it smiling without a mouth. "No. I am what remains when God stops answering." The hum swelled again, subtle, seductive, vibrating the stones beneath him. "You can end it, Elias. The world above has begun to sing the same hymn. The hum spreads through oceans, through wind, through the pulse of every believer. Only you can silence it. Only you can choose." Elias looked up, his face streaked with blood and ash. "How?" A shimmer appeared in the air, a vision, bright and unbearable. He saw himself kneeling at the altar, pressing his stigmata against the stone, letting his blood flow into the fissure beneath. The whisper beneath the altar would drink it, and the hum would die with him. But he saw another path too, standing before the tuning fork, raising his voice once more and letting the frequency grow until it enveloped the world, merging every soul into one eternal note. No more separation. No more silence. Only harmony. Two paths. Silence or symphony. The figure's voice deepened, filling the chamber. "Confess, Elias. What do you desire, peace or completion?" His chest heaved. He looked at his hands, the wounds glowing faintly, still pulsing with rhythm. "I wanted to find you," he said, voice cracking. "I wanted to hear you. And now you do." The hum rose behind him, louder, trembling the air. The bones in the walls began to move again, forming faint outlines of faces, the monks, the dead, the believers, all watching him. "We are ready, Elias," they whispered. "Give us our final song." He closed his eyes, torn between salvation and surrender. The crucifix at his chest shattered, unable to bear the vibration. Then, slowly, he stood. His voice returned, quiet but resonant, layered with the echoes of 1,000 others. "Then I will sing," he said. "Not for heaven. Not for hell. For those who still wait in silence." The figure's light flickered, like surprise, or approval. Then let the last confession be heard. Elias took a breath that did not feel like his own, and began to sing. The sound was neither holy nor unholy. It was everything: birth, decay, forgiveness, hunger. The walls trembled. The bones disintegrated into dust. The chamber flooded with light. And when his voice broke, when the final note shattered, there was no echo. Only silence. But it was no longer empty. It was full. Episode 20, The Sacristy Falls Silent.
Morning came without birdsong. The mountains surrounding St. Martin's Monastery stood still, veiled in fog. No bells rang, no wind stirred. Only the hush of a world that had forgotten how to breathe. Where the monastery once stood, there was nothing but stone and silence, the ruins blackened, the altar split down the middle like a scar. The hum that had once filled the walls, the voices that had shaken heaven and earth, were gone. Inside the ruins, among the ashes and fractured crosses, sat Father Elias. He was alive. Barely. His robes were burned, his skin pale as candle wax. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. His voice was gone, surrendered, offered, spent. And yet, the silence around him was not empty. It listened. The wind slid gently through the open arches, and the faintest vibration passed through the air, not enough to be called a sound, but enough to feel. Like the memory of music. He raised his head toward the light breaking through the cracked ceiling. For the first time, the sun touched the altar again. The blood had dried. The stone no longer pulsed. He smiled. In that stillness, he understood, the world had been retuned. The hum had not died, it had dispersed, dissolved into every grain of silence. Humanity was safe. But the cost had been voice, sound, and the bridge between prayer and echo. The silence now belonged to him. He rose slowly, his movements fragile but certain. The monastery was gone, but the echo of its faith remained, suspended in the morning light. He walked toward the shattered doorway and stepped into the fog, leaving footprints that glowed faintly for a moment, then faded into stillness. Far below, the valley stirred. Villagers awoke to a strange calm, the kind that follows the end of a long nightmare. The wind carried no sound, but the people swore they felt something, a rhythm, a pulse, like a heart beneath the earth. Children pressed their ears to the ground and whispered that the world was humming, softly, gently, like it was dreaming. And in the ruins above, where the altar once stood, a single chalice remained. Empty, cracked, cold. But as the first rays of sunlight touched its rim, a faint vibration passed through it, a single note, pure and distant. It lasted less than a breath. Then, silence again. But for those who listened closely, for the faithful, the broken, the mad, the silence was not truly silence. It was a heartbeat. It was a song unfinished. It was the echo of a man who had dared to hear God's last word. And somewhere, beyond sound, beyond death, beyond meaning, Father Elias smiled. The hum was gone. The world was quiet. But the silence remembered him.
Epilogue: The Silence That Remembers. They found the ruins of St. Martin's Monastery decades later. No one could explain why the earth around it seemed to breathe. The ground was warm, as if something beneath still lived. Birds avoided the area, and compasses spun uselessly when brought too close. The investigators who came to document the site spoke of an unshakable feeling, a low vibration beneath their feet, too faint to be recorded, too persistent to be ignored. When asked to describe it, one of them said, "It felt like the world was humming to itself." Among the debris, they uncovered fragments of scorched wood, shards of chalices, and the remains of an altar split cleanly in two. But in the center of the ruins, untouched by ash or age, sat a single object, a small silver key, blackened by fire but still warm to the touch. They stored it in a sealed box for transport, but every night, guards swore they could hear it tremble. One of the younger priests assigned to the investigation began having dreams of an old man in burned robes, standing in the fog. The man never spoke, but his eyes carried a terrible calm, as though he had finally understood something no mortal should. In the dreams, the priest always asked, "Who are you?" And each time, the man would place a finger to his lips and whisper, not in words, but in sound. A faint, familiar hum. Back in the ruins, Grass began to grow again. Flowers pushed through cracks in the stone. The wind moved through the empty chapel and, for a brief moment, it seemed to form a shape, not a word, not a prayer, but a tone. A single note. Soft. Steady. Eternal. The villagers say that when the night is still enough, you can still hear it, not with your ears, but with your pulse. They say the silence in St. Martin is alive. They say it remembers. And if you stand there too long, it remembers you.